Okay, I'm back up with BK-90 cluster munitions dispensers, and these are going to allow us to have some standoff capability with the aircraft, attacking targets in different ways. We can have different target locations set up along a route. The weapons are going to guide on that nav fix, so this is another one where having a good, properly aligned navigation system is going to be important. So we can see the basic outline here. We fly towards the target. The more speed we have on the aircraft, the greater the range. The weapons are going to fly to the target, dispense, and take it out. A standard altitude that they're going to glide at is 60 meters. If we have terrain issues that we need to consider, we can set that to a higher or lower setting. And again, yeah, outlining here of the release area depends on airspeed and altitude released from. Now, HUD symbology is going to look basically like the nav mode that I'm in right now, except I'm going to have a distance indicator, and once I'm within range I release, and here's how that'll look. I'll hit max range once the line is between the two poles. It'll flash once I'm at minimum range, but yeah, I'll have released by then. Now we have different release types, either series or impulse, and depending on the setting of this switch, I'm either going to release both the weapons or one of the weapons. Series does both, impulse does one. If I release in series, I can get different patterns on the ground set depending on what I input in the tactical setting at address 92. So if I want just sort of fore and aft, just sort of in a line covering the target, I go 921. If I want side by side, just covering a wide area, 922. If I want a compact group and just a whole lot of really tightly spaced coverage in the target area, I could go 923. I'm going to use the wide coverage area just to see how that happens and how that works. I'm just going to input 922 in tactical. So tactical input 922, enter, back to output, and now those are set up for that release. And one other little gee whiz thing right here, the ones right there represent the loaded weapon station, so as I release, if I ever go back to that mode, I'll see those ones go away and turn to zeros. Okay, so that is basically the setup. This is so ridiculously easy to use, but I have a feeling this is going to take some finesse to really get these on target and working, as we would expect, because again, it really depends on the quality of your navigation fix and the quality of the target location that you have set. This is going to be done in master mode A and F. I'm just going to fly to the steer point, go to attack on the master mode dial. I'm going to keep it in series. Altimeter is a QFE, between 50 and 500 meters. AGL is where I'll fly. Trigger unsafe, and then I'm going to get the range indications in the HUD and release. It should be just as simple as that. Okay, so let me come on around. I'll go A and F. I'll go attack. Now, I just need to fly to the waypoint, and I do have M4, a target waypoint, selected. I could have multiple targets designated along a route if I wanted to, but I'm just going to do it this way, and I'm going to get some speed onto the aircraft. And there's my range line right there. So let me get below 500, in fact. Pull the throttle back in, about Mach 0.84, that's fine. Okay, so below 500, I'm within the altitude limits here. About to come within range. Okay, I'm within range. Let's go trigger up. Fire. Depressed and held. I saw both of them come off. I'm just going to sort of follow these guys in. I have some trucks set up out here, and we'll see how this works. Okay, that was an impact way back behind me. I greatly outpaced those guys, but that is how that works. Hopefully I can get that in an external view as I go here. That was just in a different place than I was expecting. So, okay, well, that I'm going to take as a good enough demonstration for me for now, and I'm going to move on. There's a lot more depth to all these topics that I'm covering. I just want to get the basics so I have an idea of how things work. Once I get into missions, then I can start to work on technique and all the little finesse items. So let me move on to something different here. I'll be right back. Okay, next up, let me briefly revisit these RB-75 Maverick missiles. I did these once in the first mission. I just want to make sure that I caught everything that I needed to catch. Now we're going to have different display types we can get, black on white, white on black, or automatic, depending on the position of the radar selector switch. Once I line up on the target, I can go to the first detent using the same trigger on the radar stick that I would use to take a fix. Slew the missile using the radar stick. Second detent commands it to lock, or commands it to search for something with a high enough contrast to lock on. And then basically just make sure we're within range and fire the missile. So the checklist, and I'll run through this time: weapon selector to RB-75, altimeter to QFE. So let's get RB-75 selected. Altimeter I've already set to the QFE setting. Master mode selector to nav, and then point the aircraft based on the target reticle in the HUD. And I think a step might have been missed there. At some point I'm either supposed to go trigger unsafe to get the reticle, or I do this in master mode A and F. I think this might actually mean to tell me to put it into A and F. I know that I need to do that, so I'm going to go A and F. And there's the reticle that was referring to right there. Now, point the aircraft. I go to the proper selection setting right here based on the type of display I want to get. I'm just going to leave it in A2. And that's going to be the auto setting. I'll mess around with that a little bit more, and this is just all about technique, finding what's going to work for whatever situation you're in. Pull the trigger to the first detent, slew the crosshairs, lock, unsafe on the trigger, and then fire, trigger safe, and evade. That is about all there is to it. Now we are with the radar switch in A and F. I believe going to get ranging information. I could be wrong on that, but I believe that this range indication down here is going to be based off radar ranging once we start to dive on the target. I remember reading that somewhere. It didn't really stick out to me right here. In either case, well, let's just see how this works. Okay, so I'm just going to come around on these ships, line them up, and fire just really quickly here. Okay, here we are, getting the HUD into the right general location. Now at that point, I can go into the display. Now trigger to the first detent. Okay, I'm slewing it over using the radar stick. Second detent to command a lock. Okay, there we go. It took me a little tweaking to get it locked. Now, range indications. Yeah, I'm going to stand corrected on that. I was expecting range indications right there based on radar ranging with an A and F. I guess maybe I didn't read that somewhere. Okay, trigger, unsafe, and the weapon is away. And know this is going to be a good hit, and this is really all that I want to do for this because I've already touched on this earlier. Okay, and that's a good impact. And again, these are fire and forget. And same thing with those VK90 cluster munitions. They're fire and forget. So I would do other things depending on the situation with the aircraft after I fire. But I think that's going to be good enough for now. We'll go trigger safe, and I'll go back to master mode nav and radar selector back to A0 to turn it off. And I'm going to move on into anti-shipping missiles. So I'll be right back. We're on to the very last segment of the series, anti-shipping missiles, and I'm going to wrap things up immediately after this. Now, for this mission, I have RB-04 missiles loaded, and we have two options overall, RB-04s or RB-15s. RB-15s are a modern anti-ship missile with a lot of different targeting options and a lot of capability built in. I'm not going to be able to cover these in any detail here because the next update to DCS World, not the Viggen, but the DCS World client itself that comes along with the release, is going to include the ability to place waypoints for the missiles themselves, and I just don't have the ability without going in and manually creating them within the computer to do that, so I'm going to defer that and just cover the RB-04. Now this is an earlier variant of the missile, and it's very simple to use. Essentially we just need to find targets and point it in the right direction and let it do its thing, although it does have more options than that, obviously. We have a release altitude we're going for between 50 and 425 meters. I am going to actually have to descend a little bit once I get set up to release these. The missile has its own radar on board, so it's going to fly towards the target and then try to acquire an appropriate target based on settings that are designated in the mission editor and to some extent by using switches over here. It's going to either go after group targets or single ships, depending on the configuration we have it in. The HUD symbology is going to be very similar to what we see in the basic nav mode, only with the addition of a range indicator to tell us when we can and cannot fire the missile. So let's run through the checklist on this. It's weapon mode selector to attack, and then release mode selector to the desired mode, impulse or series. So let's go for attack. And I'm going to go to impulse on the selector. If I had left it in series, it would have fired both missiles at once with about a 2-second interval between them. In impulse, I'm going to fire one missile at a time. Set altimeter pressure to the QFE setting. I've got that, and I also verify what I have on my radar altimeter for an altitude matches what the QFE altitude is, and that should be the case once you're over water. Master mode selector to ANF or nav. I'm going to do the first shot in ANF and the second shot in nav. We'll see the difference here as we do it. Use the radar to find the target and make a target fix and aim towards the target. Or, if I'm going with nav, just put the flight vector on the target. Targeting mode selector goes to the desired position, group or single. And yeah, I touched on that earlier. I'm going to actually put it in the single position for this shot. And this is all just technique and finesse, you know, what mode to use in what situation. And that would take just trial and error and really thinking the situation through. But yeah, that's beyond the scope of what I want to get into here. Fly to either the commanded altitude or within the allowed envelope of 50 to 425, and use attitude or altitude hold if desired. I will use both of those. Trigger unsafe within the release range, and then fire the missile, go to safe on the trigger, and back to master mode nav. So it's really a very, very simple missile to use. So let's go ahead and have a look at what we're looking for in the radar. Let me roll out towards the target. I have M2 set up in the general location of these ships. Now let me go master mode ANF, and I'm going to go on my radar selector to the A1 position. Now, looking at the scope, I have the ships, and this is really what this radar is made for, to find ships out here and to aid in navigation. And 3 ships we can clearly see. Now, let's just say, for example, that they weren't right there where my target waypoint is, and they were, you know, target waypoint over here, and the ship's right there. What I would do is go to the first D10 of my trigger, and just as if I were taking a nav fix, I'll put the cross over the ships, press it, that gives me a nav update, and now that gives me a range that I can fire from. Now we see on the indicator here 2 crosses, one at the bottom and one at the top. That's the min and max range, so I'm within range right now. Also on the HUD, I have this indicator telling me that I'm within range. All I need to do now is basically descend, and I'll take it out of altitude hold, put it into attitude hold, get a descent going, get below 425, and fire when I'm within range. Okay, so it's just a matter at this point of going trigger up. I'm within range. Okay, one missile is away. Let me go ahead and I'll just sort of follow the missile in. I would evade at this point and go in a completely different direction, but I'll just sort of fly in formation here with the missile that should be at this point below me or pulling out in front of me. And there we go. It looks like it's going for, as you would suspect, the first ship right there. And with any luck, we get a hit. Yeah, there we go. So that is just a basic release of the RB04. The other mode that we have to play with there is, instead of going to ANF, just leave it in nav. I actually go trigger safe first. Okay, if we just do that in nav, all we have to do is go trigger up and fire. So before I make this last RB04 shot, let me just give a brief description of the RB15, and to get into detail I would need to wait for the release, because we're going to have additional functionality with the mission editor to place these missile waypoints. But basically it runs very, very similar to what I just did right there. The differences are it has a wider release altitude band. We can go 50 to 2,000 meters. It is going to have a lot of different functions when it comes to programming the missile behavior and what sort of targets it seeks. Now, to make that simple on us, we have a switch over here on the right side, VALB and STD, or in other words, selectable and standard. So this switch on the RB15 goes between the selectable and standard mode. So let's see what it means there by selectable. If I come down to missile programming, All these different options can be set using the computer in the tactical setting by going to address 80 or 81 and inputting whatever appropriate number you want for whatever function you want. So all these are available, or just by going to the standard setting on that switch, it'll just take a default standard, which is the equivalent of just 8,000 in address 80. So single target, large search area is the default that you could just go with if you don't want to get too detailed on the planning on that. Now, I mentioned the navigation points, and we're going to have BX6, BX7, BX8, and BX9. BX6 is a descent point, BX7 is a turn point, BX8 is the target location, BX9 is a destruct point in case it can't find a target. And here's a depiction of what that will look like. So there's BX6, BX7, BX8 will be the target, and then BX9 is the destruct point. And really the procedure would run sort of like what I did there, just taking a mark on the ships, except instead of using the nav point or the target point M2 like I did for this release, you would take the fix on BX8 to give it the fix on where the ships are. Now the attack setup is practically the same as we did for the RB04, so I won't really get into any details on that. Now let me just make one more RB04 shot to close out here, and I'll do this in sort of a quick mode. Instead of going to A and F, I'll go to nav. That's not going to give me the range indications on the HUD or in the radar, but that will allow me just to see a ship and fire at it and take it out. So I'll be right back, and I might actually do something with this F-16 as well. I'll be right back in just a second. Okay, coming around, I was just thinking, what situation would I use this mode in, and possibly like a radar failure where you won't have the ability to mark a target, so you can just find something visually, point the aircraft in the right direction, and take something out that way. So I have the ships dead ahead. So what I want to do is just come down here and make sure that I'm within that release envelope of, I believe it was 50 to 450 meters. That'll be good right there. I'll just fly towards this. I'll go trigger up. I'll fire. Now I'll just follow this one in and see how this does. This should do the same thing that it did last time. So we're just following the missile as it skims across the surface at 10 meters. And there we go, good hit on the ship, and I'm getting out of the area. So let me set up on this F-16 real quick. I guess I'll cover a little bit about air-to-air to just close out the series for good. I'll be right back. Now for air-to-air, we have a very simple radar mode that's going to be used that's really just there to give us ranging information. I'll just run through the checklist for an RB-74 shot, A9 shot in other words. Now, weapon selector to IRB, or press an IR missile fast select switch on the stick that we have here, and I'll safe up my trigger after that attack I just made. I'll do the switch on the stick, or I could have rotated this dial to IRB. Set target wingspan, and that's going to be done on this dial. I didn't look up the wingspan of the F-16 that I have set up out there, so I'll just go with whatever it's at. I'm just going to visually do this anyway. Master mode to A and F, and then radar to position A1 or A2. Aim at the target visually, engage radar lock by pulling the fixed trigger to the first detent. Confirm I have a good lock with the Sidewinder. Uncage the missile if necessary. Trigger unsafe and fire. So let's go to A and F. I'll go to A1 to get the radar up and running. And this is really just more of a ranging radar than any kind of an air-to-air search radar function like we would be used to in any other aircraft. Now let's see if I can find this target again. I'll be right back. Now let's come on around. I'll go trigger unsafe. I'm not sure if I have a lock right now or not. It did. Yeah, okay, there we go. I've got a good tone. Weapon in the air. He's dispensing countermeasures. And that's a good hit. That's how we do air-to-air, basically. There's a lot of nuance to everything that I've covered here in the series overall. I've just covered the basics, and the reason I've done things the way that I have, now I'm to the point where I can get into flying missions and have some idea of what I'm doing and actually be able to enjoy the missions. I've done the hard stuff already, so now it's just a matter of going out and figuring out of all these techniques and of all these delivery modes and radar modes and options that we have. Now, what do I need to pick out of this big bag of techniques that I have right now to be able to tackle whatever missions come our way? And as of this recording, the Viggen is very, very near release, and well, if you're following me this far, you're probably pretty well prepared to do the same and really start to dig in and tackle whatever there is to do in the Viggen in whatever scenario we want to place ourselves in. So I'm going to wrap the series up here. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and I'll see you next time.